CBS reports. What are we doing to our children? With CBS News correspondent Daniel Shore.
13 miles from Paul Bullard's home is a public housing project in familiar red brick, Perry Homes. It is like most such projects in most big cities. And cemented into the red brick are a series of public policies that work against the children of the poor. Because housing for the poor is scarce, the 1,100 apartments hold not the officially registered 6,000, but with unofficial residents, relatives, and friends, more like 8,000. Because mothers travel up to 4 hours a day to work in downtown office buildings or suburban homes, their children are left to care for each other or for themselves, and drug abuse is rampant. Because family planning measures have lagged, there are many teenage mothers.
Do you find that there is an incidence of young girls becoming pregnant?
Yes, we have a high rate of that too.
At about what age?
Well, I used to say age 14, but I'm having to back up and say age 12.
Because the poor are shortchanged on education, it may take 2 years to get testing for a child with learning problems. And the Perry Homes schools have reading levels among the lowest in the city. Because Perry Homes was planned on a minimum budget, there are few places for children to play. Because of the same kind of planning, Perry Homes has no doctor, no dentist, no pharmacy. Nearby there is a well baby clinic, but no sick baby clinic. And the sick must travel 12 miles to wait for attention at Grady Memorial Hospital. And partly because of the general rule that welfare is cut off if there is a man in the house, fathers are often driven away so that mother and children can eat.
85% of the head of household is a woman, because most of the men who should be in the household, they cannot make a decent living. And of course it is better to know that a child will be fed 12 months out of the year than 3 months, which during the summer when construction work you can make a decent living.
The man in the house rule was written to prevent welfare cheating, to make sure that aid to families with dependent children would go only to families headed by mothers. But the effect of the man in the house rule is to create for children an atmosphere of investigation and surveillance, and thus the welfare system in its operation turns out to be a system to make life harder for children.
The welfare system helps the disintegration of the American family. It offers money to families if the fathers will leave them and stay away, in that sense undoing the very stability of the family and taking away one of the two parents that children, of course, need. And what I have seen, I'm afraid to say, all over the country is that the legal system works against the best kind of home for these children. We don't encourage parents to be at home with the children. We don't encourage mothers to feel that they can find their destiny as mothers. We take away, in many of the most vulnerable homes, fathers from those homes. We herd foster children together in institutions rather than trying to find decent homes for them. We don't tap the resources we have in communities and with respect to older people so that they can help out vulnerable homes. We don't sanction and encourage and support in every way, morally, psychologically, and financially, the dignity and integrity of the home. And in the worst of it is that the homes that are most vulnerable are the homes that are least supported by the policies of local, state, and federal governments. And no wonder then, out of these more vulnerable neighborhoods, we get an endless cycle of troubled, delinquent, wayward youth who grow up even more and become the lawbreakers of our society. Now, I don't know how you break this cycle except by starting out with young children.
Consider daycare. You would think that certainly shows concern for children, but let's look more closely. The Perry Homes area, with its thousands of children, has only one daycare center for 107 children between the ages of 2.5 and 5. 75% of its money comes from a federal government apparently less interested in the children than in freeing welfare mothers for work, and woefully inadequate even to that end. Elsewhere in Atlanta, in schools like Cook Elementary, the state of Georgia has tried setting up daycare centers, but federal support is drying up. When we were here, there were 158 children 6 days to 6 years old. Since then, the number has been cut back to 89. 12 other Atlanta schools have had to eliminate infants and toddlers from their daycare plans. And that will make it harder for mothers of the very young to go to work or to school. Atlanta is typical of what is happening around the country. Model daycare centers that remain models. Good as they may be, scarce as they are, such daycare centers are geared more to a work ethic than a child ethic. That has been the history of daycare in this country. Crash programs in time of emergency like war to free mothers for work, and swiftly wound down when the emergency was over. Now daycare is billed as an answer to the welfare emergency, written into legislation that would force mothers to go to work. Congress took a different view with a child development bill that would provide more comprehensive services, and not just for welfare children. President Nixon vetoed that bill as too costly, as going too far towards what he called communal control of children. For the working poor, too poor for private nurseries but too rich for federal subsidy, care of children is left to their own makeshift arrangements. This is a project set up in a New York church, unlicensed, paid for by their parents, with a non-professional staff assisted by mothers giving a day a month each. Many unofficial daycare centers are much worse. Child warehousing, the specialists call them, but those we could not film. In these improvised facilities, the children must go down 2 steep flights of stairs to visit the church's only lavatory and for lunch, and up 2 flights again for naps on the church floor. And the parents of these are lucky to have found even this solution to their problem. Fewer than 10% of the children of the nation's working poor are in organized daycare programs of any kind. Fewer than 2% are in programs good enough to be called child development. In Detroit, to meet the growing demand that society ignores, a married couple runs a child care center as a profit-making business. It is the only center in the city that takes infants as young as 6 weeks. It also has an elementary school that keeps children until 6 in the evening. For children, perhaps too long a day away from home. For working parents, helpful to know their children are off the streets.
Martita put her beginning sound. Look at Martita's work.
Mrs. Erlene Morris, the director, complains of harassment from state authorities who charge that she has more children than her license permits. But her center is popular in the neighborhood because it serves a need that no one else fills. For one thing, it permits teenage mothers to go to school and to come after school to get their children.
How you been doing? Hello, Andy. How you doing? She ate about 11:15 and took a bottle at 2:30. She's due to have her medicine at 4.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
She had a nice day today.
I shall find you. Do you want her bag?
Okay, wait.
The center boasts that it is the closest thing to mama, but it bypasses the question of whether that is close enough. Dr. Robert Coles.
I don't think anything can replace parental care. Nothing in the world is a substitute for the affection and also, I might add, the discipline that children need as young children and older children in the course of growing up. And this is needed all the time by the child, and the child needs a mother and a father. And I think the day care center, at its best, might be an additional institution which would help out families in such a way that parents could be better parents, rather than be an institution that, in a sense, takes over by default and treats the child as, again, a cipher or a number, rather than a human being who needs particular attention from a particular individual.
To the limited extent that child care can offer mothers an option rather than a mandate, it runs into the whim of governmental red tape. Nowhere better illustrated than in the daycare center of Detroit's Jeffries Housing Project. There is one busy section for children of welfare mothers, backed by welfare money. In another wing of the same housing project, the working poor managed to get money for their own child care center from another government program, Model Cities, another department, Housing and Urban Development. That program has restrictions. Model Cities will pay for hardware, but not for operation or staff. Operation comes out to $28.50 a week per child, and the low-income working families cannot afford that. Their problem is to get help, but it's hard to get help for the working poor. Months after this center was completed last May, Model City said it was still trying, but when we were there last, 6 months after completion, a fully equipped center where 60 children could have learned and played and relieved their parents' minds stood silent and wasted. We have been saying that poor children who depend on the benevolence of public policies suffer from policies that are far from benevolent. But the well-to-do, remote from such dependence, they have their own ways of harming their children.
I've worked with middle-class families who lack all kinds of things, not money, not social position, not professional attainment, but have a sense of estrangement, a sense of uprootedness, a sense of not belonging to any particular community, a feeling that they're at the mercy of the next job move, they're at the mercy of the next economic cycle, so to speak, that requires them to go here or there. And also, I think, a deep and abiding sense of aloneness, in which they don't know, the parents don't know whom they can talk with and whom they really trust. And I think that if children are deprived of the things they need, both physically and psychologically at a young age, that there comes a point in which they cannot be redeemed. And I would use that word redeemed in all of its psychological and spiritual implications. They become hopelessly thwarted, stymied, atrophied. The heart dies, the mind becomes filled with all of the hate or fear the child has experienced. And multiply this child by many child, and we have many sins. And multiply this enough, and I think you have national sins, not just the individual sins that we all commit from day to day, but a national failure of determination, an ethical failure, and in many respects, a slow kind of suicide in which one generation permits another generation in significant numbers to be hurt and killed, I would say, in spirit.